Cosmic Shed.
Hello, and welcome to the 5th episode of The Cosmic Shed. With me is...
Laura.
And in Morocco is...
Ben.
Now, everyone knows where we are. We're in the Cosmic Shed. So could you describe your surroundings to us?
Well, I'm in Tangier,
where William Burroughs wrote Naked Lunch.
I've been to the Medina where they shot some of Inception.
Oh!
Ooh.
Yeah, the sort of busy market streets at the beginning. It's not set in Tangier in the film, but they shot it here.
Oh.
I've also been to Fez. I wanted to go to the place where the 11th Doctor got his hat of choice. And I am in quite a large classroom. Is it quite echoey?
It is, but I don't think that's a problem. Is it a problem, listeners? In today's episode, I'm just going to do that again because Laura very rudely sniffed, just as I said
Oh,
it.
sorry.
Which is, I mean, you
I'm
can't get the presenters these days.
Are you sick as well, Laura? Oh, I'm sorry.
I am.
Yeah, we're all suffering.
It's not good, is it?
In this episode, we will be mostly looking at Big Hero 6, and we all loved it. But the thing that we loved most about it was that it gave me and Laura an excuse to go to Bristol Robotics Lab, where we had a tour from Corra, Boushel, and we have an interview with roboticist Peter Gibbons. We will also be hearing from RoboThespian, who, as he sounds, he is a robotic actor. Ben, I literally don't know anything about this film, where it came from or anything. I just know that I loved it. So I'm going to ask you about that. But first, have you done a poem?
I have done a poem. I wanted to do a Japanese form of poetry for this one. I was trying to work out if there was a Japanese-American form of poetry, but I couldn't really come up with that. But so yeah, we already did haiku for Interstellar. So for Big Hero 6, Andrew asked me to write a choka, which is a long poem. Waka is the classical Japanese poetry form, and there's tanka, short poem, and choka, long poem. My pronunciation is probably terrible. Choka has 9 lines, 5 syllables and 7 syllables. It's a mix of those two. So my attempt at a choka goes like this. Paper lantern trams and the golden Tory Bridge. Sakura blossoms on Lombard, Haight and Castro. Spring doesn't dull grief, but old San Fransokyo is full of wonders for nerd school superheroes and a boy and his robot.
Thanks, Ben.
Thank you, Ben.
So, Big Hero 6.
Directed by
Don Hall.
And Chris Williams.
Screenplay by
Jordan Roberts.
And Daniel Gerson.
And Robert L. Baird.
Music by
Henry Jackman.
Art direction by
Scott Watanabe.
The cast: Scott Adsit
As Baymax.
Ryan Potter
As Hero.
Daniel Henney,
As Tadashi.
TJ Miller,
Fred.
Jamie Chung,
Go Go.
Damon Wayans Jr.,
Wasabi.
Genesis Rodriguez,
Honey Lemon.
James Cromwell,
Robert Callahan.
Alan Tudyk,
Alistair Cray.
and Maya Rudolph.
Cass.
I would say this film is pretty much designed for the Cosmic Shed.
Absolutely. This is what we're all about.
There is a character who says, "Science, yeah."
We've got 2 of those.
There's another character who says, "Woman up." It's got fantastical robots and other machines that is based on real technology. It's a beautiful story of grief. There's no love interest. Fantastic. It's based on a Marvel Comics property. It's set in San Fransokyo. So really, what's not to like?
Well, absolutely nothing. I think it is going to be incredibly difficult to find anything that I didn't like about the film. If you haven't seen it, stop listening now, go and watch it, because there will be spoilers. So, where did it come from, Big Hero 6?
Well, it's based on a Marvel comic which first came out in 1998. That was written by a team called Man of Action, Duncan Rouleau and Stephen T. Siegel, both American guys, I think. I think they sort of wrote it in their spare time from doing other books, and I think it was written to kind of capitalize on a bit of a craze for all things Japanese at the time. The Big Hero 6 team were all Japanese kids and Baymax. It was a team formed by the Japanese government. It wasn't very popular. It was rebooted in 2008, a book which was written by Chris Claremont, massive Marvel writer who was responsible for a lot of the classic X-Men titles, including the Dark Phoenix saga. It was only one sort of series. It lasted for 5 issues. Similar idea. It's a team of superheroes set up by the Japanese government. They're sent over to America on a mission where they meet Fred. So Fred was a character introduced for the 2008 version. Wasabi was also introduced in 2008. He was a Japanese sushi chef at that point. Yeah, I just wouldn't recommend... the 1998 version I haven't read. It doesn't have a good reputation. But the 2008 version I would avoid. I almost couldn't finish it. It was so bad. Really kind of leaden story. The kind of cultural appropriation is pretty dodgy. Some very tasteless imagery. For a kid's book, it has some awful sort of cheesecake shots of Go-Go and Honey Lemon in very skimpy bikinis. It's pretty dodgy, and their characterization is just not as interesting at all. Pretty terrible. The only kind of interesting bit is that Fred's character is mentioned as being an Ainu, the indigenous people of Hokkaido in Japan. That was kind of the only interesting part. I wouldn't recommend looking at that. So Disney, of course, own Marvel now, and Disney Animation Studios. Director Don Hall was looking for a property that he could adapt into a feature film, and just kind of came across this very obscure Marvel book. It's the first Disney animation film to be based on a Marvel property. So really interesting that it shows something obscure, something that they could improve, really. And I feel like they've improved almost every aspect of the story and of the characters.
It seems to be a brave choice if it wasn't successful the first 2 times. And then, so why choose Big Hero 6 for the film? Yeah,
well, I guess it gives them more of a blank slate. You know, if they choose something that's really, really iconic, that people have a big attachment to, then you can't adapt it so much. It's something like Harry Potter, you're kind of stuck.
Are there any ideas from the books that came through that you could see in the film, or do they lose those and just start again, sort of thing?
There are echoes of it, but I mean, even Baymax is very different. He looks like a sort of stocky version of Oddjob from the Bond films. This is the level of sensitivity we're talking about. And he transforms into more of a kind of mecha-style robot. I think in the original, he had more of a kaiju kind of appearance. Hero is a similar character. I mean, not as charming in any way. He's much more serious in the book. And he does have a love interest in the comic. The comic is set in Tokyo. San Fransokyo is completely for the film. That doesn't come from the comic. The comics are set in the Marvel universe. So they mention the Avengers, and there's a character who's kind of based off of Nick Fury, Japanese version of Nick Fury. But they wanted for the film because it's not a Marvel Studios production, it's a Disney Animation Studios production, they wanted to set it in a different universe. So that's partly why they kind of went for that alternative reality, San Fransokyo. If you want to find out a bit more about the background to Marvel, I can highly recommend Marvel Comics: The Untold Story by Sean Howe. Wonderfully detailed history of Marvel Comics from the 30s and 40s through to the 60s with Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. It goes into all the sort of infighting between the artists and the editors and the writers, all the kind of crazy business stuff. Seat of the pants way that these comics used to be made is incredible. Doesn't quite get up to the Marvel Cinematic Universe stuff, which I would have loved it to, but hopefully in the next edition. But yeah, a great read. Just fascinating. So, Andrew, you said before you had sort of no expectations going into this film.
I had no expectations at all, and yeah, I was blown away. I just absolutely loved it. The characters are great. There's the animation is brilliant. The links of real life robotics is amazing. When you go into the real robotics lab, it feels like the film.
It does.
Obviously, it's exaggerated, but it's the way that robotics are going, and all of those directions that are discussed in the film, with the healthcare and the way it could be used for bad things as well, or military, or whatever you want to call it. The only thing I didn't like about it was there wasn't a love interest.
I know how disappointing that must have been. For the sequel, I believe Felicity Jones is signed on as the love interest.
I go into a Disney film with massive expectations. I just expect it to be wonderful, and it was. It absolutely was. And it was interesting as well. One of my favourite parts of the film is when a hero is inspired by his brother Tadashi to go to this so-called nerd school, and only took one visit into it, and it was one visit to inspire him, and then he set this goal and he succeeded, and it was really, really great to see. It was quite inspiring. I love the relationship he has with Baymax.
Yeah, Baymax is brilliant.
Yeah, a cuddly robot, who would have thought?
What did you like, Ben?
Well, yeah, I totally agree on all those points. As you were saying before, Andrew, a lot of the character design and the technology was based on research that the writers and the story department were doing. So the design of Baymax came from a real medical robot, which was made of inflatable vinyl.
Really?
Yeah, and they actually went to a real nerd school, which I think is called the High Tech School, and got some ideas from the kids who were working there. So,
wow.
Yeah, they actually got the idea of Honey Lemon's embrittlement powers that actually came from some of the kids in the High Tech School.
Oh.
I would just imagine from your perspective, it's one of the best science communication films
you
could ever see. It's kids going in to see this film, and they're going to want to be robot designers.
And that is the reality, exaggerated reality, but the reality for people working in robotics is that they go to work to play making robots. I mean, why did they make this film when I was a kid? I could have become a robot maker instead of sitting in a shed talking about other people doing it.
It's not too late.
Is it not? Oh, it's good.
My first reaction to seeing the film was, I just want to live in that world.
Amazing.
I mean, I said before it was perfect for the Cosmic Shed. It's perfect for me in so many ways. I worked in Tokyo briefly, and there were so many things that reminded me of Tokyo. The trains on the sort of raised tracks, the neon signs, models of cats and chefs all over the place, the Tokyo Tower. There's very recognisable landmarks from San Francisco and Tokyo. That's a really lovely thing of mixing those two cultures in a really organic way. It doesn't feel forced. It feels completely lived in, the city. And again, with all of the sort of speculative but very grounded technology, like the wind turbines that are floating above the city. Beautifully realised, gorgeous animation, easily on par with something like How to Train Your Dragon, or the Lego Movie. The character design is really spot on. Especially Baymax. It's such a simple design, but so much emotion can be projected onto just those two dots. It's almost like, he almost looks a bit like Gromit, I would say, in some ways. The same sort of blank slate that you can put so much emotion onto. And just so much kind of positivity. It's the first time Disney has had a multiracial character as a hero. And Ryan Potter, who voices Hero, has a Japanese father, a Caucasian mother. It's a really diverse cast. I've read a few articles on either side of that there was some concern that they've adapted this story about Japanese heroes and they've mixed up the races a little bit. So I've read a few things on either side of that, but I think mostly people are really, really behind it. And there's a few articles which we'll link to about parents taking their biracial, multiracial kids to see this film, and it's the first time these kids have seen themselves represented in a big feature film. Fantastic.
Yeah, no, that is brilliant. Laura just passed a note to me to say this. That's how I felt when I was watching Brave.
So I sat in the cinema and she started climbing the mountain at the start of the film next to the waterfall, and with her hair, and I was like, I've been waiting 22 years for a Disney princess I can relate to.
Oh, you're giving away your age.
I've been waiting for 20-something years.
I suppose in a way I hadn't noticed, and I think that's because it's like reality, if you see what I mean. It's like the world that we live in. It looked realistic in that way, I guess.
It's not over overemphasized, but the sort of Japanese parts of their lives, you know, they're real, they're there.
Yeah.
Even in little things like the cat is called mochi, which is a kind of rice cake.
Oh.
It's really well thought out. There's not many Japanese names in the creative team, which is maybe a bit of a shame, but I think all things considered, it's really positive. There's also a couple of really strong women characters. You know, they're scientists, they're heroes, great voice work from all the heroes.
Amazing.
I don't know if I was a massive fan of Fred. I think he had a bit too much to do, but you know, fair enough. He's Stan Lee's son. That was a small point, that they've kind of taken this originally a new character and whitewashed the character to bring a white face into the team.
He annoys me because he's a science enthusiast, and I sort of feel like he's me in the film, and he's nothing like me.
I could see you in that costume though, with breathing fire.
I know. How can you see me? Oh, I see.
It's also a good example. We've talked before about story development and maybe how things get lost in that process. People, especially when we're dealing with real people's lives
and the hero's journey.
The hero's journey, and what's interesting about real stories kind of gets lost in that process of kind of clicking things into place, having the emotional arc, having the 3-act or 5-act structure. In this case, as I said, the comic book it's based on, the ones I've read anyway, pretty terrible from a story point of view. So the time that was spent developing the characters, developing the story, you know, the story is kind of precision engineered, and it's really enjoyable from that point of view. You know, you can just enjoy the engineering that's gone on and just be kind of carried away by it. At the same time, it's maybe a little bit too neat. There's some things which just fit into place a little bit too easily. I would say the Callahan, the bad guy, maybe a little bit too neat, his motivations. But the pace is great. It never loses sight of the emotional journey. I mean, this kid goes through a lot. He's lost his parents. Tadashi and Hiro have lost their parents at an early age. He loses his brother. He almost loses his best friend. He almost loses Baymax. There's a lot of grief, even for a Disney film.
Yeah.
There's a lot of loss.
Yeah.
And they never lose sight of that. They let that kind of breathe.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they give it time. It's not that kind of simple 5 stages or whatever stages of grief. It kind of sits with him. Tadashi is always there.
Yeah.
It felt real to me.
Yeah, completely. It is really beautifully done, really, really real as far as animations go, which is as far as anything can go, because they're amazing.
It sort of reminds you a little bit of How to Train Your Dragon with the flying sequences. It's reminiscent of Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, which is a fantastic science-based animation.
Parts of it do remind you of The Incredibles, which is an incredible film.
Yeah.
I really...
Yeah, I don't think it's not quite up there with The Incredibles, which, it's fantastic. But John Lasseter, obviously one of the main guys behind Pixar, is heavily involved with the Disney Animation Studio films. It's separate from Pixar, but it seems like they've kind of imported a lot of the Pixar process into the way they do the Disney films now, which is just a lot of story development. They spend years making... For this film, for Big Hero 6, I believe they made something like 8 or 10 versions of the film before they even got to the final script. So they storyboard it all the way through, they make animatics, they have early versions, they use the actors come in to do early takes, and things can change dramatically between versions. So they just have so much time and so many people kind of taking part in it. That's why they get to such kind of well-realised story.
Yeah, absolutely. What's animatics?
Animatic is kind of an early version of the effects. So they use it even in live action, they would use an animatic to kind of map out the action sequences. It's a very quick 3D animation version.
If you want some more information on the writing process of the film, the story development process, listen to a great podcast called The Q&A with Jeff Goldsmith, which has a really detailed, interesting episode on Big Hero 6.
If you ever get the chance, I don't know if it's actually still touring. I've seen it a couple of times. The Pixar exhibition is one of the most beautiful, inspiring things you will ever see.
That sounds incredible.
They have models, sketches, kind of early script version.
Oh, wow.
You see just how much care and love is kind of put into every aspect, from the design through to the story, through to the character. And we haven't seen a great Pixar film in a few years. I'd say this is kind of up there with with some of the Pixar films for sure. Yeah. Some people are saying that the golden age of Pixar has passed.
Who are these people?
How very daring.
The last couple of years we've had such great animation from other studios. The Lego Movie. We're doing all right for,
we'll keep an eye on
3D animation. And it's not a Marvel movie. Marvel Studios have had pretty much no input into the film, and there's not even a tie-in comic, which is a little strange. So it is very much a Disney film, and you can see a lot of the Disney tropes within it, but it's done in such a kind of joyful and charming and exciting way.
Yeah, no, it's great, and there are some frozen Easter eggs in there.
Let it go.
Just to be clear, those aren't very cold chocolate eggs. I think Olaf sneaks in the background and that sort of thing.
There are some Marvel Easter eggs as well. There's quite a few comics and characters in Fred's bedroom, and obviously you see Stan Lee. There's a character who's called I think it's Dr. Miyazaki, so there's a reference to Hayao Miyazaki. There's lots of really interesting stuff. Probably one of the only bad things I'd say is that awful song that kind of comes on in a montage during the sort of Avengers Assemble moment where they're kind of testing out all their tech. It's no, everything is awesome.
But to be perfectly honest, I'm really clutching at straws trying to find something that I didn't like about it. It's just a great film and really thoroughly enjoyable. Similarly, our trip to the Bristol Robotics Lab, there's nothing to complain about.
Excuse me. Hello. How are you?
Very well, thanks. How are you?
Greetings. I am RoboThespian. Do you think I'm sexy?
Not particularly, sorry.
So what do you do for a living?
It's hard to explain, to be honest.
Fantastic!
Hello, my name's Corra Boushel. I work at the Bristol Robotics Laboratory.
I'm Peter Gibbons. I'm a mechatronics engineer here at the Bristol Robotics Laboratory. RoboThespian is very much, to aid science communication.
Amazing.
You've met RoboThespian before, haven't you?
I have. I used to work at the Science Centre in Dundee. I used to work in the cafe, and RoboThespian was positioned right next to the cafe, and every 5 minutes he would sing. We weren't friends by the end of the summer, but it was really nice to be reunited with him last week.
But he's had a bit of an upgrade.
He has had a bit of an upgrade, absolutely. So originally, his mouth was just a moving part that just moved up and down like almost like a shutter. It was very, very robotic, and now his face has been changed, so it's responsive, full of expression. You can change the features of the face, whether it's a man, whether it's a woman. He's programmed with a vast amount of phrases from films.
Warning! Danger! Will Robinson! Warning! Warning! Danger! Will Robinson!
So you can change the head and the face, so you can move the lips up and the eyebrows up and down, so you can give it some expression, which makes it quite a popular robot that people like, which is why it becomes very good to put into certain situations, such as a museum or a science centre. And also very reliable, because a lot of it runs on pneumatics. So you can run it sort of 8 hours a day, 7 days a week. So that's quite an achievement for sort of robots, because generally robots break. So, you can go into any robot lab sort of in the world and say, oh, can you show me that robot working? Yeah. And the chances of seeing a robot working are fairly small, because they're either being, changed, updated. Having a history of robots is very difficult, because usually taken apart, reuse the parts, there's usually something that's not working on them. So the RoboThespian, we can say a little bit limited in what they can do. The movements are very good, but they're slightly slow, and our project's going to look at gesturing, because you'll go and see a robot and it won't really gesture much. It'll say, hello, my name is... and so this is probably one of the only ones that does have some gesturing attached to it. So it's fairly new, and I think the feedback is that it is very real, and probably even more so because it's attached to the body as well, because they usually sell the head as just a separate sort of top half of the body, and so it doesn't quite have the same impact. people say it's a bit too real. Because the body is very sort of, it looks like a robot. It's not trying to hide it. Other than the Corra's favourite pants.
I'm really offended that they've given RoboThespian pants. Upgrade. Robots don't have genitals. There's no need for robots to have pants.
He's a life-size, a human-size robot.
Yeah.
As in a fully grown human-size robot. So he's not overly portable. But they did say if you had a van, you could take him to places, and I do have a van.
Oh, you have a van, and we have a shed.
Yeah, so
I say you have a shed.
Maybe we could steal him. If you're looking for RoboThespian, he's in the shed. We were very fortunate to be invited to Bristol Robotics Lab, because it's not somewhere you can just go, is it?
No.
So how did that happen? You met Corra doing something else, didn't you?
I helped out at an event, children as engineers, so the children had been in their classes in school designing different robots and learning about robotics. It was a robots versus animals project as well, so it was really exciting, and I think it really made the children realise that engineers are scientists too. You can actually construct and build things as part of your job in the future.
What is robots versus animals? Are they literally robots fighting animals?
So with Robots versus Animals, it's a project that's been run by the Bristol Robotics Lab and the Science Communication Unit. It's basically identifying features in nature, so bird flight or the way that ants work together as a team for construction, and identifying these key features that have evolved, and they've put them into robots, because if they're successful in nature, then why can't they be successful to aid us in robotics? They've also identified the qualities like the human and monkey hands, so that's inspired like robotic tools for surgery. So the things that we saw in the lab are actually being used in real life situations.
Yeah, so. And in films.
And in films, yes. Absolutely.
Slightly less importantly, but also entertaining.
Thoroughly entertaining.
Yeah.
So after meeting Corra at the Robots vs Animals, she kindly invited us along to the Bristol Robotics Laboratory for a tour.
Our other robot is actually broken. He's in the hospital after stage diving, would you call it?
Yeah.
Stage diving during one of Corra's events.
No children or animals were harmed. Just the robot.
Just the robot, yeah. And the children found it hilarious.
Does he walk around?
Yes, it's a little robot this high. It's called a Now robot. He walks around. They actually have their own football league. So they used to have fallen over, but this one had a strange bug. So it's gone back, and I'm not sure what it is. So I think the accelerometer gyro, as it moved too much, for some reason it was actually driving its ankles. So rather than just free falling over, it was actually driving itself into stuff like the floor.
I felt like it was taking its lead from Italian footballers, making a huge drama every time it fell, and then it managed to damage its hip, I think, in the process.
Yeah, just the gears on it. We've got another robot called Poppy that hasn't actually been built yet. It's going to be 84 centimetres tall, half the size of a human.
Wow.
So
Child size.
It's rough prototyped, so you can download the CAD model and you can just print it. So there's a hand for it as well.
3D print your own robot at home.
Wow.
That's what we're going to build. One of the reasons why it's probably fairly good to build a robot this size, and why some of the robots such as Asimo have come down in size, is it's cheaper, it's safer, it's easier to transport, and probably slightly less complex. As you go down too small, you end up with complexity issues, because it's very difficult to build things that are a lot smaller. So there's sort of an optimal sort of size that seems to be starting to occur in robotics, where it's still fairly easy to build but safe as well. This one, they are designing it to walk at the moment, but then you've got a lot of issues because that's a heavy robot. So if it falls over, first thing it's going to do is break itself, and second thing, it could break somebody else. The aim of the project is to use 3 different robots and see how the general public engage with them and try and measure that. So to see if they engage with the RoboThespian more, if they're going to engage with the Poppy robot or the small Now robot. We look at things like this because it's just to see how people, mimicry as well. There's another sort of aspect in terms of rapport and building up trust from a human-robot interaction, is the robot would try and have a look at mimicry and do some form of gesture copying. So if you moved it, the robot would do this. But that's one key area where rapport is built in a non-verbal communication situation. And also initiating, say, someone else, where a robot could have a particular gesture that it does as part of its personality, and see if they can start getting other people to follow that gesture as well, so that a person would also mimic a robot, because it's just a fairly fundamental thing that people do in terms of trust. The project is in partnership with Bath University, Exeter, Queen Mary London, Oxford University. So some of those are social psychologists, so they're looking at how people are influenced. And it's sort of the idea is to regain public spaces a little bit, or to enable people to be in a public space as a robot if they couldn't physically get there, or if they're in a different location, the other side of the world, for example, and just see if it makes a difference.
If you were, for example, incapacitated at home, instead of Skyping your relatives would be able to embody a robot, and that robot can then move around the space that you're in. And there's an awful lot of questions about how does that feel?
The ethics of it all.
Do you trust the robot? But then, why would you trust a robot less than you would trust another human being?
And would you trust a robot more because you've not got a stranger coming in, or perhaps somebody you do not know coming into your house?
Exactly. There's a lot of studies that go on into this, isn't there? But there's that question of when the robot is too human, that we start to have a real issue with it, and that's definitely a feeling that I had with RoboThespian. And some of the smaller ones and things that don't look like an entire human being are much less worrying.
And I think there must be a balance, isn't there? So you don't want it to look too alien, human enough but not too human that it could be
humanoid but not human-like, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Baymax in the film is big, round, bobbly thing, and as a cartoon it doesn't feel very threatening, but I can kind of imagine in real life that would be quite disconcerting if that bobbled up in the corner of your room when you were feeling unwell.
Maybe this film is a tool to make robots more accessible, because they've just made this robot really cuddly.
And then put armour on it.
With an ageing population, more money and more space needs to be taken up to care for an ageing population. So perhaps this will enable people to have a better quality of life, and perhaps that's a great way of dealing with maybe larger numbers of people that need care.
Yeah, absolutely. So. And it's not something that before Big Hero 6 and going into this robotics lab, I have to say I hadn't thought about robotics in healthcare. It wasn't.
No, neither did
I guess because I'd always come at it from a sci-fi angle. You don't get an awful lot of robots in healthcare in sci-fi. And it's amazing to see the work they're doing. I mean, so much of that lab is about healthcare, isn't it? Sort of geared towards that.
Definitely.
So we arrived, and with the exception of these lights outside that are on robotic arms, there's nothing to distinguish it from any other very large building on the campus.
Absolutely. So
until you walk inside, and you're greeted by just a sea of engineers and roboticists working on their robots. Is incredible.
I feel like it's something out of a film.
Yeah,
it really is.
Yeah.
So there's big signs everywhere saying no photography, and you need a key pass to get through every door. So you immediately feel quite important.
Yeah.
And then
and you sort of turn to the left, and there's a dismembered robot that somebody's working on.
Yeah.
I mean, literally, humanoid robots, just there, people working on them. So when you're looking around, it feels a bit like a robot hospital, because there's very few working robots there, because they're working away on them.
Everything's very, very clean, very, very white.
You go around from pod to pod or room to room in the robotics lab, and there's like a doctor there working on an engineer working on their robot.
How we're going to control the robot is we're going to use a motion capture system. So, for example, we've got a Kinect here, which is on the Xbox 360, so we can stand in front of the Kinect and we can move our arms. It doesn't give you the detail of the fingers, so we do have a glove that will measure your hand, but we're going to get a system, one they use for the movie industry, and essentially they have a little sensor, an IMU, which is an inertial measurement system, your unit, which is a gyro, an accelerometer and a magnometer, and you put those in the glove onto your fingers, different points onto your hand, and it will capture all your movements. And then what we will do is put those movements onto the robot, so you'll be able to move your fingers and the robot will move its fingers. Then what we're going to do is going to use an Oculus Rift. So we've got an Oculus Rift here, and so what we can do then is when you wear the Oculus Rift, that has IMUs inside it, so when you move your head this way, the robot will also move its head, and so we can put a pair of stereo cameras onto the robot, and then you'll be able to see through the eyes of the robot. I could be stood here, and you can have the robot somewhere else, and you'll be able to look around using the robot's head and see through the robot's eyes. And then also, because you've got the motion capture system, you'll be able to have a look at your hand, and your hand will be hopefully this robot hand here that will move, so you can move. And that was a very strange feeling for the first time, to be able to actually see that your hand is a robot hand. But it is very good. It feels quite natural when you just want to look around, except you're in a different sort of location to where you're stood. First time we tried it, because our robot is small, you can see it with people's noses.
Another use which I hadn't thought of since I was a teenager and playing lots of computer games, which is that robots could be an amazing addition to the gaming world. So Peter was showing us this Oculus Rift with an Xbox Kinect.
Yes.
So you can look around with the Oculus Rift. It's a virtual reality headset, and the Xbox Kinect is essentially a webcam that picks up your movement. Your head movement and your physical movement could control a robot in a game environment. You can imagine playing a football game where the robots were physically on a field and people were in their houses controlling the robots with the movement of their bodies.
I do have an interest in robot football, as you may have gathered. The robot football is very difficult. It lacks the capability to pass and the cognition aspect of it. They're now getting some good functionality in terms of walking and the ability to kick. It would be very nice to be able to go telepresence into a robot, because that way you can start capturing some of the cognitive things that humans do. And that's another part of the project. Once we've got a motion capture system, we can have a look at the gesture set, and we can start having a look why we'd use a gesture and when. So there's some general gestures that are used in conversation. Once we've got the ability to capture the information, we can then start seeing if it's possible to put some of this autonomously onto a robot. By the year 2050, they want to have robots be able to be humans. That's their general umbrella that the RoboCup tournament sits under. And so that it's quite a large tournament. They have several thousand people attend from all different countries around the world. So it's quite a big event. They're slowly changing it year on year. So this year they're actually using a small, proper FIFA ball. They had a lot of block colours to help recognise things. This year's gone to white lines and white goalposts. So they're slowly changing the goals year on year, literally changing the goals to make it more realistic. For me, there's an aspect in terms of gaming that will change, and I think part of that is, if you can have some physicality. Already they have the first-person shooter with the Oculus Rift, where you can actually feel like you're there, and you have a platform that you can walk around on. And I think that sort of shows a route forward, especially in terms of the Kinect, that maybe virtual reality and actually feeling like you can be there. Another aspect of realisticness is if you were there as sort of a robot, because then you physically have some of the problems that you don't have in simulation. It's more realistic. Some of the military development in terms of the types of robots they want. In the war situation, if there's a robot there rather than a person, there's obvious benefits for that, which is one of the things they've done in terms of drones being there instead of someone in a fighter plane. There is obvious benefits. Naturally, things are moving that way. There's a group, Stop Killer Robots, and that's a new group that's sort of been developed from some of the academics as well. That's trying to say that the autonomy shouldn't be put into the robots, because you can have a system that if anyone sort of crosses a particular border, then they're just automatically shot. That is a dangerous route to go down. But it's like any technology, it's how it's used.
Yeah, absolutely. You don't want robo-thespians wandering across borders and singing.
Singing the sound of music. I might shoot him.
The use of robots in military circumstances is, you can see the benefits of it. And you can see the benefits of it if you're sending a robot in rather than a human in. But unless you're sending a robot in to fight another robot, what you're doing is sending a robotic killing machine in to slaughter human beings. And that doesn't sound like a benefit to me.
Future Wars based on the robot football model, where it's just one group of robots smashing another group of robots.
Yeah. On the moon. So we send
Yes.
groups of robots to the moon to fight each other. And that's exactly where my thought went, Ben. I thought, well, that's okay then if you have robots fighting robots. But then you have trade disagreements, and as a result of those trade disagreements, you have robots fighting robots. And that sounds like a terrible film.
Are they fighting in front of a really terrible green screen background?
No, it was going to be on the moon, but yeah, I think you know what I mean. There's plenty of positive uses for these things. Obviously, the military ones, it's a big part of it, but when you're in the robotics lab, you're surrounded by people working on... I say working, it looks like people playing, doesn't it?
It does. It actually does. It looks like every little boy or girl's dream that you get to sit there with Meccano and plasticine and Lego and build stuff, and it's amazing. It's so exciting, and to think that you can actually, from when you sit when you're little and have an amazing time playing, that you can actually have a career in this. I'm all for that.
So it's just like the school in Big Hero 6.
It is very,
it
very
actually
similar.
is.
Yeah,
I really want to go to nerd school. Another exciting project they're doing is looking at renewable sources of energy, aren't they, to fuel robots?
Yeah.
So they're actually looking at using urine
and other bodily excretions.
Other bodily excretions, yes, and being able to run robots off of that.
Did you see anything in the Robot Centre that was also featured in Big Hero 6?
Well, apart from the health things, there's a professor of electronics there called Professor Alan Winfield. Just as we were leaving, he was arriving. Sadly, we missed it, and he was setting up swarming robots.
So that's the microbots that work together?
Yeah, absolutely. And they're not as small as those, and I'm fairly certain that Alan Winfield is not an evil super genius, but swarming robots.
Yeah, again, it ties in with the robots versus animals. It's like inspired by, say, birds flocking, or ants and termites working together for construction purposes. The swarms are really, really useful because they're cheap, they're replaceable, and they can complete tasks that a single robot would be more expensive and it wouldn't necessarily be able to do by itself.
Don't be thinking about these things in terms of as it looks in Big Hero 6 with it, walking across the sea and all that sort of thing.
No.
We're not there yet.
Not there, but they're developing things to enable the robots to learn, so they can adapt to the environment around them, and so every eventuality doesn't have to be pre-planned or programmed. Ultimately, if you think of a robot that can be programmed to adapt to the environment around it, it could be used in disaster zones.
Hang on just a sec, there's a drone going overhead.
Oh, right. How rude.
If you go to the Royal Institution Christmas lectures, there was one this year on robotics, and they featured some of the robots from the Bristol Robotics Lab. So we'll post a link to that, and you can see some of these robots in action there. Very, very beautifully, they performed a robot orchestra version of the Doctor Who theme tune. They have some of these swarming robots there. They're just doing a very simple... I say that, it's not simple, but it looks, in comparison to Big Hero 6. They take one of these bots away from the group and put it, sort of further away from where the spot is, and it comes back into the group. So there's a dinosaur, it's in the shape of a dinosaur.
Yeah.
They take one of the robots off its foot and put it away, but nearer its head, and it rejoins the head, and the rest of them reshape the body into the dinosaur. So there's nothing controlling them as a sort of a central brain. They're just individual robots talking to each other, the same way that birds swarming or ants or bees do. That's amazing.
It is quite amazing. If you think about the robots learning to flock together, if you observe them initially, they seem a bit hopeless. They just crash into each other, they're moving around, and there's no kind of consistency, no general direction. And if you leave them, I think approximately 30 minutes or so, you see that they start to control themselves, they start to flock together, and they use information from their sensors, which is really cool. And then every minute or so, each robot's control software is replaced by a great grandchild of itself. So it's constantly learning, they're constantly evolving. And so the longer you leave them, the more... almost like tightly together they're going to form. I think it's just quite amazing.
Incredible stuff. So we saw these being set up, but we didn't see them the way we had to get out, sadly. What I would say, Ben, is you've not missed out completely, because Laura and I are organising this thing, or part of this thing, called Pint of Science.
We are indeed.
It's May the 18th, 19th, 20th. this year, and as it sounds, Pint of Science, it's science in the pub. What we're doing is we're going to take some of the robots from Bristol Robotics Lab to a pub in Bristol.
Oh, it doesn't get much better.
We're going to have the roboticists there, and we're going to show, and it's basically a show and tell about all this amazing work that they're doing in the robotics lab. It's going to happen in May in Bristol. But if you're not in Bristol, wherever you are, your local town will have a Pint of Science, and check it out. There'll be some amazing events.
Yeah, it's international.
Cool. So that's about it for episode 5. Thank you very much to Corra, Boushel and everyone at Bristol Robotics Lab, and particularly Peter Gibbons, for showing us around and talking us through their work. I mean, just brilliant.
What an amazing opportunity.
Yeah, thank you so much. We hope there'll be plenty more robot films that will give us an excuse to come back.
Yeah, definitely.
Do keep an eye out for those robots in Pint of Science in Bristol in May. And thank you very much to Ben for joining us from all the way over there in Morocco.
My pleasure.
Thanks very much for listening. Do follow us on Twitter.
At The Cosmic Shed.
Or on Facebook.
Or on lots of other things. What's that? Stitcher we're on now. We're on Stitcher.
Exciting.
Thanks very much, and goodbye.
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 The Cosmic Shed.
Science fact.
Science fiction.
And everything in between.
Yeah, the characterisation is just not as interesting at all as in the film version.
Sorry, Ben. Are you using this class?
Yeah, I thought it was free until 4:30.
Ben is currently negotiating use for the classroom to record the Cosmic Shed in Morocco.
Can they go in Colin's room?
Huh?
Can they go in Colin's room?
Go, Ben.
I can't because I need the internet. This is the only classroom with internet.
Okay, let me see if I can move the tables to the other side.
Thank you. Yes,
What can
sorry.
we do?
Round 1. Ding, ding, ding.
I'm causing chaos.